These things are great, offering you a boost to your dynamic microphone and allowing you to get those sweet, sweet signals into your computer at a decent level. But as a sales rep at your store is basically telling you that it's a must-buy, take a step back and ask yourself, do you actually need one? Stop me if you've heard this before. Dude, you're buying an SM7B. You need a Cloudlifter. Now that might be thrown at you by a friend or a salesman at the store you're shopping at. And it's fundamentally false. For starters, it's not the fault of the SM7B that it has low gain. It's the fault of your possibly anemic preamps that you might find yourself purchasing one of these. Now, if you're unfamiliar, this is an inline preamp. Mic activator, inline booster, they have many names. This one's the Fethead. You can also buy a Cloudlifter. But what they are is simple. They're a preamp, or I guess kind of a preamp. They will amplify the signal coming from your dynamic microphone so that you don't have to turn the gain dial on your interface as far as you would without it. Now, it can be very helpful for microphones such as the one I'm using, the SM7B, which on paper requires 60 dB of gain to push. This is the point where it gets a bit tricky. Do you need an inline preamp if you're buying an SM7B or a mic with similar gain issues? Well, not necessarily. And to explain that, let's look at how preamps work. So preamps are basically amplifiers for the signal coming in. Now with a dynamic mic, that signal is very small. So the preamp adds the gain to the signal, which allows you to hear it. But each preamp has a maximum gain, as well as its own flavor of noise that will compound as you turn it up. And especially, it will become apparent if you add compression. And that noise is called the EIN, or the equivalent input noise. Without going too in depth, it's the accumulated noise level of the preamp when set to its highest gain level. And no matter how expensive the preamp, there will be noise. Okay then, well, what's a good EIN? Well, let's take a look at this Fethead itself. It has an EIN of negative 129 dBu, which, without getting into any of the who's and whys, is basically as good as it gets. Now with EIN, the lower the number, the better. So when you look at the Zoom H5, it has an EIN of negative 120 dBu, which is higher than negative 129 dBu, meaning the H5 has louder preamps than the Fethead, right? So let's go back and forth between Fethead and No Fethead on the H5 and see if you can tell the difference. As I speak into the SM7B here, may I remind you that I'm going through the Zoom H5, which has been considered for years to have issues with the pre's. As I switch back and forth, you're going to notice my gain level is about the same, which is because I didn't set the gain for the highest level of output, but so that they match. As I speak into these microphones, they are peaking at about the same levels. Can you notice a difference between the sound generated? Now, of course, you can hear much more of the preamp noise from the H5 natively, right? And on the side that has the much lower noise Fethead, well, it's hardly anything, right? That's because I'm not driving the preamps as much with the Fethead, meaning less noise gets in. But that's with a high noise preamp. Why don't we switch over to my Audiofuse studio to see the difference? Here we have the SM7B plugged into my interface. This one is straight in, and this one has the Fethead. Now you're going to notice a lot less difference between them now. Well, that's because my interface has extremely low noise, which is exactly the same as the Fethead, negative 129 dBu. So I'm literally offering nothing to my recording other than a tad more noise with the extra preamp. So for me, the Fethead is actually kind of useless. So what that means is that if you have an interface with 55 dB of gain and an EIN of around negative 129 dBu, you should be okay without a Cloudlifter. And yes, that gain is important, Now, while 60 dB is recommended on the SM7B, you can get by with less as long as the gain is clean. However, do note that you will be boosting the levels in post, almost guaranteed, but more on that in a bit. But what about other mics though? Should you get an inline preamp if you have, say, an SM58? Well, the way to tell how sensitive a microphone level is the specs. Now, you're looking for a somewhat confusing number like this one, the Shure SM58, and this is the SM7B. Now, this is the level of signal that is pushed out of the bottom of your mic. The same signal is passed through both microphones, and the SM58 has a signal of negative 54.5 dBV, and the SM7B comes in at negative 59 dBV, a full 5.5 dBV lower, which means it's less sensitive. So if you require 60 dB of gain for an SM7B and you can get by with 55 if the preamps are clean enough, you should only require about 54.5 dB of gain to get the same levels out of an SM58, with 49.5 dBs enough to get you by with quiet enough pre's. Now, it's okay if some of this is going over your head and you do want to learn more, hit that subscribe button as there's more on the way that tries to demystify some of these terms. But now you're probably asking, but Aiden, my waveform is so small, isn't that bad? Well, thank you for your question. And no, it's really not. You see, most people actually record with a lot of headroom so that they can manipulate the audio after. And while it's almost a certainty that you will need to lift the levels on post, this isn't necessarily a bad thing. You see, being too hot on your levels is so much worse, and it can lead to several issues like clipping and distortion. And believe me, those problems are much harder to fix than simply gaining them up. So get used to your cute little levels, and they're going to serve you in the long run. So then, do you need to buy an inline preamp? Well, it might surprise you, but probably not. That's because most interfaces that are released these days actually have pretty clean preamps. So if you're thinking you might, first I would suggest trying it without the preamps and possibly saving that money for something else. Or perhaps put that extra $100 or more into a better interface that can easily drive the SM7B. Also, one quick note before I let you go. No, you do not need an inline preamp if you're driving a condenser. In fact, these preamps actually rely on phantom power, so effectively, the two of them won't actually even work. You're just gonna end up getting ripped off. Thanks for watching. Let me know down in the description, if you have one of these, which one did you go for? And did you actually need it? Cheers, and I'll see you in the next video.